When we got the boat back there, we didn't have any place to leave it. And Sears sold Chrysler cars. So I said, after we'd been out in the field there for a couple of days, I said, let's ask Chrysler people if we can get in the Chrysler boat well. They had a boat well there for their own boat years before when they raced. So they said, sure. So we finally got the mow in the Chrysler boat well. Then it was nice getting it ready for the race. I was getting, let's see, oh,
And you were telling the story about opening the barn, the door, and seeing Vicel's Hurricane 4 there.
yeah, I didn't know it was a boat. I thought it was a big milk truck. I just brought this out. But I saw a lot of boats in there that were built for the Gold Cup race. None of them showed up to the race because none of them, after they saw me run the mow around, they decided to leave their boat tied up. I mean, in the barn where it belonged. Some of the worst things you've ever seen. There was one boat, it was a deep V like this, that deep. I mean, it was like 45 degrees, and there was a flat strip across the bottom, 6 inches wide, the whole length. Just straight strip across the bottom. And the theory was to get going and finally plane on that little 6-inch strip. Well, it didn't work out just that way because it fell off of the plane. But I saw them try, and the only way they could see was cut a hole on each side near the bow because they couldn't see over the thing. Because when it ran this way, and they couldn't look around, so they cut a hole in the sides and put windshields on the sides to see where they're going. There was another boat there about 16 feet long, had 2 Allisons in it, side by side, and I can't remember the guy, a famous race driver too, owned it. I can't remember his name. And it would go, you know, but when they slowed down, it'd go under the water too, because it was too much weight for that little, even though it had about a 10, 12-foot beam, it still was only about 16 feet long. 2 guys in it. One guy could have done it, and they would have been better off than hauling another 190 pounds. But you can't tell them these things.
Well, how did you do in qualifying? Did you qualify faster than any of the other boats?
Oh yeah, but I could have qualified, you know, 125 miles an hour. But if I did, it would ruin the race for Detroit and all these guys that worked so hard to get all these boats. They had 12 boats at least ready to race, but none of them were quick enough. I can't remember the shape of the other boats. For years I remembered exactly the shape of every boat. Oh, they had 2 66s in the race too. A guy by the name of Bob Bogey, who had come down in a flamer during the war. He was a pilot in World War II. And he had a boat there, a 266, and it ran pretty good. And if you could qualify at 165 miles an hour, you're in the race. Didn't make a difference if you had a canoe. So there were a lot of small boats in the race, which I didn't know about. I went to Detroit, and I'm just looking for big boats, and that's all. So the day of the race came, and we lined up, and there was a clock, and I ran hard so I'd hit the clock and speed. And then I'm coming down there about 165, 70 miles an hour, and suddenly there's a 75-foot Coast Guard boat right in the way. This guy had mistook the skipper had mistook the 5-minute gun for the final gun, and he thought he had 5 minutes to get across the course. And I'm doing 160, and Bill Cantrell is coming behind me someplace at about 90, I guess. He's out here someplace. I can track him. And I don't know to this day if I went around the bow of that boat or the stern of the boat. I just don't know, because I turned the wheel and suddenly the Coast Guard boat was gone. And I don't know, I got back in the course because of the buoys. They had a lot of buoys along there, and I got back in the course. So when I got to the turning buoy, which was farther down, I got speed back up again, and I'm trying to get into it about 110, 120 miles an hour. Single buoy turn, too. That's what they had, a single buoy turn to each end. Because they had found out that 3-point suspension hydros don't turn sharp. So they changed the race course. Used to have 3 buoys on each end. So they changed the race course to 1 at each end in order to put me at a disadvantage. I would have done the same thing with the competition too. Well, I cut my teeth on single buoy turns. I raced for years at the Marine Stadium in Los Angeles, single buoy turn to each end. It's the only way to turn. So I got down there to that single buoy turn, and here's a little 266 just going into the turn. Where he came from, I don't know. And I was going to hit him. And I turned the wheel hard to the left before I got to it, and the bow of the boat went right over this guy's helmet. I found out if you turn the wheel hard with slow-mo 4, you can lift the bow right up and over. It's a lot of fun if you want to do it, if you're crazy enough to do it, but this was an emergency. And when it came down, I looked, and here this guy was a skeleton. He would look like a big helmet on here, a little tiny skinny face, teeth, just teeth is all, no lips. And I didn't know it was Bob Bogey that came down in the flamer and to burn his whole face off. And I thought, quick like a rabbit, I thought I killed him and he's a skeleton already. These ideas go through your head rapidly. And I never did see him again after that day, not on the race course anyway. He told me, he said, I'll never run against you again. He said that bottom of your boat didn't clear my helmet over an inch. And I was going, maybe 140 or 120 when I started. And I was down to no speed by the time I got to him. So it was a bad time to start, and a bad start. So I didn't make good time because I didn't try after that. I was looking for more obstacles, and there were a lot of them. They didn't close the course off to those big ore boats running up and down the river. And here I'm going down the chute, and here's a big ore boat in my way. And churning up the back end, the big waves coming off the back end, and I got around it. It was terrible. Then there were planks of floating down the river, dead cats. In fact, the only way I saw this plank was there were 2 dead cats on it. And then tin and beer cans all over the place. You could hear them go out of your propeller. Just the whole the riverfront was covered with beer cans. I never saw such a garbage can. It was a whole garbage deal. I'm surprised I made it through there. And so I didn't make good time. You don't make good time when you're battling the elements all the way around.
So the main competition came from the elements, not from the other racers.
No, the other racers were nothing. In fact, Oh, let's see. Bill Cantrell was, no, Lou Fazel was driving Miss no, Miss Thriftway, my sweetie.
Mm-hmm.
And he was really on it hard, and I was battling the elements, and he was up ahead of me. And I saw a boat ahead of me, and I thought I got to pass him, so I went, I punched it and went by him. And then I didn't see him again after that. I kept looking for him, all the time, running a race and trying to find other boats, and afraid to find one like I had already seen.
Mm-hmm.
It was a mixed-up, crappy deal. I think I averaged 87 miles an hour or something. I'm surprised I averaged that much, because I thought I'd stopped too many times around the race course.
Who rode with you in the boat?
Welch, and he'd never been in a race before, and he was nervous. I put 10 strips of tape on the dashboard, and I said, your only job is to every lap take a piece of tape off so we know how many laps we got left. We finished the race, all 10 pieces of tape were still on it. I knew he was real nervous, so I reached up and I hit him on the head, and it was a borrowed helmet that went down over his eyes, and that made him mad. He's Irish anyway, so he's poking me. I mean, really poking me. And I'm warding him off. Trying to run a race, and all these other things are happening. It was crazy, mixed up things. You don't dare stop. You spent your whole life waiting for the race in Detroit, and you're not going to let it go because some dummy is beating on you, or some wrong boats in the wrong place at the right time. And there was a hole in the river. And every time I got to that hole, the moe would just go down, and I'd have to fight to get it back up again. Because you run in one of those holes at 140, 50 miles an hour, and you're in trouble. If it goes down, the bow goes, then you're fighting the bow after that to get it back up again.
I noticed in watching pictures of the race that the trim tab was taken off the tail fin.
That's right.
Why did they?
They thought that was an advantage to me. They thought that had something to do with the operation of the boat, and they made me take that trim tab off. And so I had half a ton on each turn of the steering wheel trying to keep it straight. In fact, I was told by engineers at Washington University that you turn a propeller with 24 inches of pitch at 12,000, you have 150,000 pounds, no, 50,000 pounds side thrusts. And that's what I had, and that's why that trim tab took all that off of there. And so at the end of the race, I was pooped. And I was strong before I went, because in Seattle I knew I had to be strong just to drive the boat, and I was lifting weights like this until I had muscles in my muscles. And so I went back to Detroit real strong, but I wasn't strong enough because I was pooped after 30 miles.
When you won the race, how did Stan Sayers react? Was he happy for you, or?
Oh yeah, he was happy that the boat won. I guess he was.
Did he give you the credit that you thought you deserved?
He never did.
Never?
He told everybody it was a backyard boat. He thought he was doing me a favor by saying he was a backyard boat, but I had built hundreds of hydros. It wasn't exactly a backyard boat. It was the world's fastest boat, is what it was. And no boat ever gone, and no one ever took credit for ever going faster than the moe ever did. And that was only 160 miles an hour, and I had it over 200 several times.
How did the people in the other racers in Detroit react? Did they ask you to build boats for them?
Yeah, I had orders for 7 boats right away at 50 grand a piece. That's the only price I could put on them. I didn't know. I would have lost money on them. I don't know. Fazio wanted one. The owner of the Indy race car track wanted one. The guy that owned General Oil Company in California wanted one. I can't remember all of them. And I ran down to Sayers and I said, I got it made. When I get back to Seattle, I'm going to be busy in a bird dog. I've got 7 Unlimiteds to build. You're not going to build any. I have a contract with you. And I said, I do? I mean, you do? He said, you bet. It says that you don't build, drive, or design any boats for anyone for 3 years. I said, when did I sign that contract? The other day. Just before the race started, Sayers was on the dock, and the 5-minute gun had blown. And I had 5 minutes to get my butt in gear, and here the solenoid didn't kick the starter in. And here I had a couple of guys working on that. And I'm waiting for them to get it fixed so I can hit the starter and get the engine running. And Sayers put a piece of paper in front of me. He said, I'm not going to support your wife for the rest of her life if you killed or hurt. Sign this release. So I signed the release. But it was a contract, apparently. I don't know if it was, because that's the only time I ever signed anything. I didn't know what I was signing. And I saw the contract, and my name was on it. And it said not to design, build, or drive any other boat for anyone for 3 years. When I went to work for Kiekefer, he wanted me to go to work for him the day I won the Seafair race. He was out in Seattle, and when I won that race, he was there. They were waiting for me to go work for him. So I went to work for him, and he said, why didn't you build any more Unlimiteds? I want one, he said. Build me one. I said, I can't. I got a contract that says I can't. He said, I want to see that contract. You know, you ever hear of Carl Kiekefer?
I never met him, but
Read the book Iron Fist.
yeah.
And then you'll know Carl Kiekefer. And you'll know a lot about me, too. Because I'm in it about 70 times.
Really?
But mainly, you read that book, it's very interesting. Carl was a dynamic sledgehammer. Iron Fist is nothing, he was a sledgehammer. That's what it should have been named. What was I talking about?
You were talking about how Sayers wouldn't let you build any boats for
Oh,
3
yeah.
years after
Yeah.
that contract.
Well, no, I was going to tell you something about Kiekefer, and I've forgotten
Well,
what
he
it was.
wanted you to go to work for him. In
Oh, yes. He
1951.
wanted me to go to work for him, and took me a while to convince him that he had too big of a temper for me to go work for him or anybody else with a temper like that. So he wrote me up a contract, and on the bottom of the contract it said, I, E.C. Kiekefer, hereby do promise never to display my temper with one Ted Jones. And I'll pay him X number of dollars a year for working for me. But there was something else I was going to tell you about either Carl. No, that slipped.
Okay. After the Gold Cup, did you go back to Seattle before the Harmsworth, or did you stay in Detroit the whole time?
I stayed in Detroit for the Harmsworth.
Yeah.
It wasn't the Harmsworth, was it?
Well, the
It was
Silver Cup was the next race.
Yeah, Silver Cup. I
And
think.
did you drive in the Silver Cup?
No, I broke my wrist. the reason I didn't drive the Slow-Mo 4 and the Silver Cup was, and there was another race too. In the meantime, a guy by the name of Lou Fagel wanted to be the driver of the boat because I had broken my wrist.
How did you break your wrist?
I was driving a Slow-Mo 4 and Joe Empens was riding with me, one of my crew members. And we're going down the river, and I'm testing out some new spark plugs that Boeing built. Boeing Aircraft was building spark plugs. And if they worked, Boeing Airplane Company would pay my expenses all year if I accepted those plugs and used them in the Gold Cup. And if I won the Gold Cup, they would do great things for me. But I couldn't get the speed out of them. And I had the throttle to the floor, and I'm going down the river about 160, and that's all I could get out of it. And a cruiser pulled out from between two docks, and we're running close to the docks, and here's this cruiser ahead of me, and I had to turn the wheel hard. Don't pull over anything is better than hitting the side of that cruiser, because the people in the cruiser and Joe and I were in the race boat too. And the Mo went right up on its side, and Joe started flying out of it, and I reached up like this, and I hooked my fingers in his belt and pulled him back into the boat. And the boat was on its side all the time. I pulled him back in the boat, and when he came back in, I had my hand on the steering wheel, and he banged on my wrist here and broke my wrist. And so I'm steering with the left hand, and the boat is still moving all over the river, from side to side. One time be on its bottom, next time be on its chine, then turning the wrong way. And you know, I had 160 miles an hour to suddenly get rid of in just a few feet, and it finally did. It quit. It did something else to the boat too. It cracked the deck on both sides, right at the engine. Right at the engine well, both decks were cracked. You could see them, big cracks. We wanted the boat to be okayed for the, what race? Was it the Harmsworth? Harmsworth race, I guess, coming up. And I didn't want anybody to see these cracks, so in the meantime I had a thing built for my wrist so I could work a little bit with my left hand and do some with my right hand. And we put 2-inch thick mahogany by 10 strips, one on each side, the whole length of the 4. I took them down, I had them tapered from 1 inch to 1/4 inch from the center each way. And they were long pieces of mahogany too. They were as long as the boat, 28 feet long. And I glued them on, hard glue on the deck to cover those cracks, because the Harmsworth committee wouldn't accept the boat if they saw the cracks. So I couldn't hide all the cracks, so I had a guy sit on each side when the inspection crew came around. They wondering why a couple of guys were sitting on the boat, but they didn't say anything. Neither did I. So we were picked to drive the Harmsworth, or this, yeah, it was the Harmsworth, yeah. And we needed a driver, so Sarah suggested we talk to Lou Fagel, because he and Fagel had a deal going on a furnace, sale of a furnace of some kind, and he wanted to get acquainted with Lou. So Lou came around that morning to drive the boat, and he took a quick ride and brought it back, and he said, "I wouldn't drive this piece of garbage if you gave it to me." because the first day I drove the boat, the stern would come out at 94 miles an hour, then the stern would move over about 2 or 3 feet, or maybe more, and that was real disconcerting. So I tried it again, and it came out, but it only went over about 2 feet. And after the third time, it only went over about a foot. And the fourth time I tried it, it didn't go at all. What I was doing was correcting for it automatically with the steering wheel. I was compensating for it. I knew it was coming, and I was turning the wheel. So I never did notice it after that. Well, I forgot to tell Lou about it, and it he went down the river, and its tail popped out of the water, and the back end moved over about 4 feet, and I don't blame him for not wanting to drive it. So I told him, I said, go out and do it at least 3 more times, and then come back and tell me what you want to do. And after about 3 or 4 more of those being Hawes do's, he came back and said, that's the most wonderful boat in the world. I want to drive it. Because he took it around the race course, too, after he got it straightened out. But that's typical of every prop riding boat, because there's nothing in the water but the propeller, and the propeller is turning to the right. All propellers and race boats turn to the right because you're making left-hand turns. And if you have a right-hand propeller, you go into left-hand turn, and it holds that left-hand part of your boat tight against the water while you're making your turn. Years ago, I raced in Mississippi. I raced one of my limited boats. Mississippi rules, you turn to the left, it's right. And I had a right-hand propeller turning to the right. I had a hard time even coming close into third place on that job.
Yeah, that sounds tough.
Yeah. When you're not propellered for, if you're not set up for the race, you don't do a good job at all.
Now, later that year, there was one more race that you drove, or not you drove, but I don't know if you drove or not, but there was one more race out in Las Vegas, I think. Do you?
Yeah, I drove Las Vegas, but again, Anchor Jensen was a bugaboo on that one. Before we went to Las Vegas, somebody talked him into a stainless steel shaft to put in the slow-mo. And I stayed away from stainless steel because you couldn't straighten them out. They all had just enough hook in them to make them unusable. And if you hit them and straighten them, they break because they're under tension. So I never got a stainless steel. I just got Inconel, which was 100% guaranteed straight. And he took the Inconel shaft out and put the stainless steel shaft in, and he didn't tell me, he told Sayers. Of course, Sayers had a fit about it too, because I'd already told Sayers that I wouldn't have a stainless steel shaft in the boat. Well, he told me about it too late to change it, so we had to go to Vegas with a stainless steel shaft. And I think I won the first heat, and the second heat that doggone shaft broke. And lost the race because of Jenselite operation.
And this whole time you were still working for Boeing, and did Boeing give you a leave of absence to go to the races?
No, I quit Boeing to build 5, Slow-Mo 5. I quit Boeing, which was a mistake because they told me that I was in line for, what do you call it, forever take care of you. Dear. Anybody knows it but me. You have to work someplace X number of years. They pay you
like a pension? Or
pension, yeah. I can't think of these things. I could have gotten a pension, and they told me how much, and it would have been great to stay there, but I was a boat racer at heart, airplane builder second.
So you left Boeing to
Yeah,
build the 5?
1951. to build Slow-Mo 5 because I'd had enough problem with getting Slow-Mo 4 built from a distance, you know, when I wasn't there every day, and argue with Anchor about how to do this and how to do that. So I did a lot of the work myself. I stayed there. Go ahead.
Did you get along better with Anchor when you were there working with him, or was that?
Yeah, I ignored him.
You ignored.
And he didn't make me so mad because I was ignoring him. He was ignoring me too. That was good. I like to be ignored by guys like that.
Was he very involved with the 5, or did you do most of the work?
No, he was involved with the 5 as much as it was a business with him. It wasn't a love of anything. It was just a business. They did a good job. Did a fine job. But I changed all the signals. I laminated everything on 5. I took one layer of oak up here, one layer of spruce here, and another layer of oak here. This way I had a hard oak against the bottom, a hard oak against to hold it together. And then the battens, the same thing. I laminated the battens. The deck carlins were 5 layers of spruce, and the second layer down was white oak in order to hold the screw, hold the deck on. So I cut down a lot of the weight. I think Slow-Mo 5 weighed 1,000 pounds less than, maybe 500 pounds less than Slow-Mo 4 because I laminated a lot of things. And I got a lot of arguments out of that, but as I say, I just ignored them and went ahead and told the guys what I wanted.
What else was different on the boat? Was the lift different?
Yeah. Slow-Mo 5, Slow-Mo 3, I put 3 degrees angle of attack in the lift of the tunnel on Slow-Mo 3. On 4, I mean. The Slow-Mo 5, I put 5 degrees. Now that's a big, big jump. But 5 degrees would give me a lot more acceleration. And I knew this. So, and when on Slow-Mo 4, I put a 7 5/8 inch strut. So the propeller was only 7 5/8 inches below the bottom of the boat. On 4, I put a 9 3/4 inch strut. So that the propeller was 9 3/4 inches below the bottom of the boat. Now the propeller lifts the stern. The propeller handles the complete height of the stern of the boat. And I knew that about 120 miles an hour with 5 degree angle of attack, that boat would be halfway to the moon.
Yeah.
But by that time, the tail would come out 9 3/4 inches and cancel out 2 degrees of angle of attack, I hope. And it did. And it worked just that way. But the 5 scared everybody that drove it because of this. First, the tail would come up, and then the nose would come up, and then the nose would go back down, and then it went through these antics getting up to speed. But that's what you have to do if you want an all-out boat, and this is an all-out boat. Slow-Mo 5 is real quick, and there's no reason why, even with a sick engine, you can't get that to run 150 miles an hour, because it accelerated so good with the stock engine. I never had anything but a stock engine in either one of the boats. We didn't know how to soup them up, and if we did, Sears wouldn't put the money in it to soup them up anyway. He just wouldn't spend any money like that, even though he was getting the money for nothing in Greater Seattle.
Greater Seattle for this.
Greater Seattle was picking up the tab on everything. I didn't know that. If I did, I would have gone direct to Greater Seattle and asked them for the money to put in the boat and hop up the engines. It's pretty hard to race stock engines against hop-up engines, but we could do it real successfully because the hulls were so much superior. That's the only reason why we could.
Now, by the time the 51 Gold Cup came around here in Seattle, there were several Detroit copies, or would look like Detroit copies of the
Yeah,
exhibition.
but they didn't copy all the way. They copied some of the profile, but they didn't put any lift in the stern and the deck. They didn't understand where to end the sponsons, what size propeller to put on it, and how much lift involved in the propeller. It isn't one big thing that wins the boat race. It's dozens of little things that you learn only by spending your idiotic life racing them. And I started racing them in 1927, and I was like 20 some odd years old. Was I? I was born in 09. I started racing in 27. I was just a kid.
18.
And I went up a mile at a time till I got to 200 miles an hour, you might say. And a little piece here, a little piece there made it possible. I can name you dozens of things. Even the location of the strut has so much to do with the speed of the boat, because that locates the propeller and where it is relative to the bottom of the boat and how far forward from the transom it is. You know, so many little things like that, and shaft angle. And Detroiters put, you believe it or not, but their bearings in the struts were poured lead bearings, and they had to re-pour them between each heat because they wouldn't last a heat. Well, I use micarta, which is forever as long as you keep pumping water through it. So I use micarta bearings in the struts, and I drilled holes down through the strut and fed water in them to keep them cool so they wouldn't burn up, because they'd burn up too if you didn't cool them. But you cool them with water, and you use the same struts for 3 or 4 years with no problem, racing 8, 10 times a year. They wouldn't. And another thing, you use a micarta with a grain running at a 2 o'clock position, because the propeller turns and puts the thrust on the strut bearing at a 2 o'clock position. So if you have the end grain at the 2 o'clock position, it's going to last forever. If you have the side grain, it'll only last a couple of races. It's just, you know, it's little things like this.
I never thought of that.
Oh, there's a million little things, and you'll learn them as you go along. Rebuilding some of my boats, you'll see these things if you look close.
Sure.
But you don't know where to look most of the time unless I tell you about it.
That's why we're here, to find out where to
And
look.
I'm happy to tell you about it, but I just don't remember what you should know, because it's standard with me. It has been since 1927 to learn these things, and I know them. Even though I don't have a memory, I don't need a memory to do the same thing over and over and over again. I've done the same thing with every boat I've built, and every boat I've ever built has won races, and I can say that 99 out of 100 have never been beaten, ever. Any class, outboard or inboard or outdrive or tunnel boats or ocean racers, or I've built them all.
Yeah.
Including hydrofoils. And I won the hydrofoil races too with that hydrofoil boat.
Really? That's good. Before the 51 season, the Quicksilver was being built in Portland.
Yeah.
Did you ever go down and take a look at that? And see
Yeah, I
what
sure did. That was real interesting for me, because history told me that his son, Mathat's son that owned the boat, flew during the war, and he was real well acquainted with all the engines that were used in the American airplanes during the war. So the British came out with an engine that was triple blown. One of it's probably only one or two ever built, and he found one of them and sent it to his father out in Portland. His father ran a sand and gravel pit down there in Portland. And he said, "Dad, when I get out of this service at the end of the war, you and I are going to build a race boat. We're going to put that engine in. I sent you an engine." And the engine finally came, and in the meantime, the boy was killed in the air, in the air race, in the airplane. And so Mathot bought a set of plans from John Hacker for a boat that was designed in 1930 or something like that. It was designed for 275 horsepower, and they put this fantastic engine in it, which was about at least 3,000 horsepower or more in this boat. So I had to go see that. I heard about it, and, you know. So I went down there, and the boat was outside the sand and gravel pit yard there, and I was looking at it, and somebody came over and said, "What the hell are you looking at?" You know, nice people, nice, quiet people. I told them who I was, and they said, "We know who you are. What are you doing, copying?" And they're belligerent people. Everybody's belligerent in this stinking business if they don't know you. I said, "No, but I'm going to make sure this boat doesn't race where I am." And they said, "Why?" So I went through the boat with them and told them why. They had a 1917 Dodge steering wheel, which was a steel spoke like that, with a wooden rim around it, with little screws holding the rim onto these steel spokes. I guess you know that would last through the first turn, maybe.
Yeah.
I doubt it, though. And then they had clothesline cable and clothesline pulleys, taking the lines back through the boat to two little rudders about as big as my hand, one on each side. Well, those clothesline pulleys wouldn't last 5 minutes. And the deck was put on with nails, and the nails put on an angle and bent over on the outside to hold the deck on. It was just a pile of junk. I've never seen anything worse. So I told this guy, I didn't know who he was at the time, but it turned out to be Mathot himself. I said, "Don't bring it to Seattle because I'm in charge of safety and I won't pass this boat. And you're wasting your time bringing it to Seattle because you're going to kill yourself if you ever drive this piece of garbage." So he kicked my butt out, or he told me I wasn't welcome. I got my butt out. Good thing you didn't try to kick it out. So I came back to Seattle and I told Jerry Bryant, who was in charge of the race coming up, about this boat. And he said, "Well, if he comes up, I'll go let him race." I said, "You're an idiot. Don't let him race. Because I'm going to be in this race too, and I don't want that piece of junk on my back." He said, "I'll do as I damn well please," and he did. And Mathot brought it up to Seattle, and he allowed it to run. Mathot didn't know enough about boat racing to know that you had to have a helmet and goggles and life jacket and know something about driving a race boat. You should know how to turn left at least. So Jerry Bryant loaned him the equipment because Jerry used to race outboards and he had helmets and goggles and one thing and another. And so Mathot had to have somebody else because this engine required some adjustment because this triple blown engine is a very fantastic piece of equipment. It's a fantastic piece because once you put it in high blower, there's no way you can retract it for 7 seconds. And you've got buku horsepower, uncontrolled, for 7 seconds. And so Mathot had to have somebody else ride with him. So there's a young guy in the pits, Army sergeant from wherever the Army is, south of here, Tacoma. No,
Lewis.
yeah.
Lewis.
And he rode with him, poor guy. And they didn't have a jacket for him, so Jerry borrowed one someplace. And
But he wasn't a team member. He was just somebody in the pits that day.
yeah, just another guy that wanted to ride. Everybody wants to ride.
Mhm.
If they don't know the boat, they're stupid. You know, and they could make a mistake too, especially that one. So he got in the race and was very poorly operated the first heat. He came out of it. In fact, I don't think he even finished. The steering wheel fell apart. And by the time they got another wheel on it, something else fell apart. Cables or something. So the first 2 or 3 heats, he had no points. And he should never have been into the 3rd heat because he had no points for the first 2, but Jerry Bryant allowed him to get in the 3rd heat because he could say anything he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So I told Jerry, I said, "You're going to kill those guys." "Oh, mind your own business," he said. I was in charge of safety, too. He should have listened. According to the APBA rules, he's supposed to listen to me no matter who it is, but they didn't. And another guy was also had my job in Detroit. He tried to tell him not to let these guys race. What was his name? A very famous old racer
In Detroit,
and a writer. He wrote for
Mel Crook.
Mel Crook. Mel Crook. Boy, you're good to have around because I don't remember anything. And Mel Crook said, "No way, that piece of junk can't even go out in the..." But Jerry Bryant said, "I'm running the show. You can go out and race." So he let him go out in the 3rd heat. And he didn't turn that blower on until the 3rd heat.
Mm-hmm.
And the propeller, of course, wouldn't stay in the water, and it kicked the tail up. Meow, meow. And I could hear it clear across the race course. I could hear this engine overspeeding. It was a beautiful engine. Let it bust up like that. It made me sick. And I remember seeing him go down his last straightaway. Meow, meow, meow. And the bow just barely kept it from going under. But when they got to the end of the straightaway, he was going so violent, his tail was going up 10 feet. And when it came in at the end of the race course, if it had gone another 50 feet, it would have killed 5,000 people. And instead it went down. It got stuck in the sand and killed both of them. I thought, and the kid riding with him, which was a shame. It hit so hard that their heads went down in their chest cavity. Came down so hard. I witnessed an airplane that came in like that. A bunch of people on it. I opened the door and nobody had a head. That was a sad situation. The thing came in like this from about 200 or 300 feet and hit, and they're all sitting in the seat and their heads went down out of sight. They were all engineers, Boeing engineers and Swedish engineers. They were going to buy a Boeing super plane that we built. I don't remember what it was. Anyway, that's how Mathot got killed, and that's a sad situation.
Well, there were happier things that happened that day. The Slomo 5 won the Gold Cup.
Yeah, but I wasn't driving
Did you
it.
drive?
I was
first
driving 4, and that's another thing, too, that Lou Fagel, he's a cheater.
Yeah.
He's a real cheater. Before the race, I went over to Sarah's to get the boat. I was to drive. I won the flip to drive Slow-mo 5,
Mhm.
didn't I? Yeah, I did. Because Fazil had 5 in I won the flip on not that race, but the next race, the first Seafair race. I won the flip to drive 5 in that. But Fazil won the flip to drive 5 in the race before the Seafair, which was that Gold Cup
Gold Cup.
race. Yeah, Gold Cup that Mathot got killed in. That's right. And what was I going to talk about?
Well, you were talking about how Fagel ended up driving the 5 instead of you.
Oh, yeah. So I went over to Sayers' house to make sure the Slow-mo 4 was ready to go. And I was shocked because there was a slot cut in the intake manifold. The intake manifold to the carburetor is like this.
Mm-hmm.
And on the radius to face the bow, he'd cut a slot out of there 2 inches high and the width of it about 10 inches long. And this was destroy everything that I designed in this. When you run an Allison or Rolls engine, you don't have the advantage of having cowlings and so on like you do they had in the airplanes. So you make your own. You find out how the air comes in that carburetor and how it goes right straight down on the impact tubes of the carburetor and actuates the goodie out of the carburetor.
Mm-hmm.
And I had experimented with these radiuses for months. And I finally got one that really worked. When you stood on that throttle, the air came in just right and went down the impact tubes perfectly. And the boat really took off like butt was on fire. And he cut a slot in it. And the air would go right through that and destroy all that goodie that I'd put into it. And I said, who cut the slot in it? To Sayers. Oh, Fazil did you a favor. He's got to figure it out. If you get in anybody's rooster tail, the water will come right through that slot and not go through the carburetor. I said, you know better than that, and I know better than that, and Fazil knows better than that. I said, take it out, take the Slow-mo 4 out now yourself, and see what speed you get out of it. So he went out and he came back. He said, I can't even get 100 miles an hour out of it. I said, plug up that hole you might. Well, there wasn't time. So I had to run it the way it was. I told Fazil to take it out too, and he wouldn't do it. He knew that it was screwed up. Louse. That isn't the only time he followed me. He followed me up in the next race, which was the Seafair race.
Mm-hmm.
He said, listen, I was driving 5 and he was driving 4, and he knew I could beat him with 5. He's a good driver, there's no doubt about it. Fazil was a good driver because he drank a whole fifth of Jim Beam before he got in the boat, and that made him a good driver. I heard from the doctor at Seattle Arena, Seattle Yacht Club,
Mm-hmm.
that some people are more astute when they're half drunk than they are when they're completely sober, and Fazil was one of them. He was good when he was the best driver in the world when he was half full of booze, because he had no fear at all, just boom, flat out. And he drove that way. He drove very convincingly, too. So he said, make it look like a race. Let's stay fairly close. So I did this with him to make him look good all the way around. And we had an agreement that going into the last turn, we're on our own. Well, he went on his own ahead of me instantly. When he saw that buoy, he stood on it and got through the buoy. And I had to get around him on the outside to beat him. into the line. I only beat him by 2 or 3 boat lengths. But he told the people that made the cup that he'd won the race, and he had his name on it for 30 years. Lou Fageol was named a winner of that first Seafair race. And Ron happened to be out, my son happened to be out in the yacht club one day, and he saw that cup, and he read Lou Fageol. He said, "Hey, my dad won that race." "Oh no, it says right here Lou Fageol did." So he had it changed, and so my name is on the cup now. But the first time in, now it's 40 years or 50 years, whatever it is, 35 years, whatever it is. But that's the kind of guy he was. He took every little advantage he could to be called the winner. How he could enjoy being a winner when he knows that he got beat is beyond me. It's absolutely beyond me. But that's the way he did. And I talked to the guys that he raced cars against. They hated him because he cheated in the car racing. In the sports car, he had a Porsche. And he cheated in every facet of the race. So much for Fageol.